Right back here on the show. And as you know, March is no more mad anywhere than in my house. So those of you who follow me on social media, you've seen me every year with the 80 white index cards up on the wall with every team's resume as I pick my own field of 68 and I do the dirty dozen, which is 12-0 over the years. That's happening again. Trust me, it's not a pretty scene. Don't let your kids go into that room. Hey, we've got a great guest here on the show this weekend. Bob Thompson, he's a former Fox Sports Network president and the founder of Thompson Sports Group. This guy has done it all, and he's responsible. If you like the Big Ten Network, he's one of the guys who put it together. Bob, great to have you on the show.
My pleasure to be here.
Just want to start before we get going here, quick and dirty. How do you start a network, and how did you guys come up with the Big Ten Network at a team that at a time when nobody was doing this kind of thing?
Well, a colleague of mine, Larry Jones, was at the Big Ten meetings. I think it was in Florida, maybe Destin or somewhere. And him and Jim are throwing some things around. And Jim had some unfortunate conversations with ESPN about potentially doing this. And so those guys were scheming away and, wrote it up on a cocktail napkin, is what I'm told. And then when it came to the time of actually trying to put the thing together, given it was going to be a cable network, it was kind of dumped off on into my lap. And so I worked with Jim on, putting the partnership agreement together, the original rights agreement, and then got set and ran about, the whole network together. And that entailed, finding an office building in Chicago and finding a president, finding, hired the first, I don't know, 10 employees. So, it was it was an interesting experience. We had one tough year when we didn't get carriage right off on a lot of the cable operators in the territory. But we had the DirecTV carriage and we had the Dish Network carriage, and we had picked off a few others here and there. But fortunately, Jim was able to hold all the presidents and athletic directors and coaches together. And I was able to ultimately, figure out a way to get us carried. And by the time the second year came about, we were pretty much blanket coverage in the Big Ten territory and even expanded well beyond that.
Bob, I have to ask. The landscape has completely changed over the past few years with all the expansion and the Big Ten, of course, expanding as well. What are your thoughts on that, and what do you see happening with Big Ten expansion in the future?
Well, I think some of the early expansion, talking about, say, maybe Maryland, Rutgers, Nebraska, and part of that was probably Big Ten network related, in order to get some additional eyeballs for the network, create some flip what were quote outer markets at a lower rate to inner markets at a higher rate, and really help the network from a financial standpoint. It also brought some good programs to the conference. In a little bit, you can say the same thing, certainly, probably not to the same extent, but for the LA market, that was an important ad for television. I think it was also an important ad just for the conference in general. Going forward, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. I think at this point, the Big Ten is standing pat. I mean, obviously, with Kevin moving on, probably nothing will happen until a new commissioner comes about. I also think that one of the reasons was that they didn't want to get to a situation where they were ultimately responsible for putting a knife in the back of the Pac-12 network. Long history between those two conferences, and I really think that some of the members had a difficult time with, say, going and poaching a couple more members of the Pac-12 conference, which could have proven, its end or its demise. So I think that's actually a good thing that everything seems to have stood holding pat right now. I think the expansion of the CFP certainly helps all the other conferences outside of the Big Ten and the SEC. They know they have a path to get to the college football playoff. So it's created some level of, everybody's kind of stood down. Now, if for some reason the Pac-12 cannot reach an agreement that satisfies its members, and a couple of folks in the Pac-12 get wandering eyes, as I like to call it, and bolt, then all bets are off, and I think that could cause some additional movement. Um, we'll have to wait and see. I hope and I believe that the Pac-12 will get a deal that's close enough to some of the others out there. Obviously, it's not going to be Big Ten numbers. It's not going to be SEC numbers, but it'll be close enough to keep the conference together, which I think for college football in general, very important to have strong conferences coast to coast, especially when you get to the playoffs. You don't want to just have something down the middle center part in the southeast part of the country. You need to be strong from the ACC to the Pac-12 and everything in between for college football to really, in the playoffs to really have the implications that it can have and should have.
You talk about the Pac-12 trying to figure out what they're going to do. How do you look at the decision of adding potentially streaming to a package? Because I know the NFL has kind of toyed with it a little bit with Amazon. What do you, as an executive who's worked in the industry, how do you look at streaming versus television?
Well, I'm a firm believer that you need to, reach your viewers wherever they are. And, more and more these days with cord cutting, and in many cases, people who never even had a cord in the first place, cord nevers, as they're called, you need to find a way to reach them. And so I think it'd be incumbent on every conference to have a streaming element to their deals. And I think pretty much everyone does, whether it's, through the ACC digital network or through ESPN Plus. I think the, Pac-12 or the Big Ten will have some Peacock element, some Paramount Plus element. So I think it makes sense. The question, you have to get to this point where you don't want to be in a situation where you're trading dollars for distribution. Someone might write you a big check, but if nobody can see the events, then that creates a problem. Mm-hmm. So as a element of a package, it's important and can bring you some additional money. You get your feet wet. With streaming, you're going to reach some people who otherwise wouldn't necessarily see your product on, say, the linear cable bundle because they don't have it. But you still maintain the wide distribution that the cable networks have, and certainly the broadcast networks have. So there's a balance I think that you need to have in there that creates a package that benefits everybody, gives you the reach you want, gives you the dollars that you might pick up from streaming, and so it's a win-win for everybody. The question just is, what's the mix, and how does that mix evolve over time?
Talking with Bob Thompson here, the former president of Fox Sports Networks, and giving us some great insight, because as we go on message boards and discuss the topic of expansion and TV packages, media rights, streaming, all that, a lot of fans would understand this is not just walk in and like I said, it's not a tit for tat. I mean, this is a deep and very complex issue to go through. I want to bring up the ACC. We finally this week, we've heard it all rumblings, under the surface, but it's finally percolated up to where it's becoming a little bit of noise. In terms of the story this week, that Clemson and Florida State both have been very open about the ACC deal and that they're locked into this till 2036. It's kind of the one piece of this, and their deal is pretty much ironclad when you look through their media rights deal. Do you feel like if enough teams complain, and if there's something you can't answer right now that I understand, that if there's enough ACC teams that begin to kind of fight back, will they get more money, one, out of ESPN, or find a way, not now, but a few years down the line, to maybe somehow get out of this deal to try to go join an SEC or a Big Ten?
I've looked at the grant of rights. I have never really looked at the ACC television deal. I understand its term. I think certainly getting out of the grant of rights is difficult. If you had a group of schools trying to get out of the grant of rights, maybe it's a different situation. There's obviously going to be some significant penalties. The television partner is going to, if they're successful, the television partner is going to want some money back. Obviously, you don't have the same schools, so I don't know. It's hard to say. I really think the conference and ESPN can certainly work together to try and figure out some ways to hopefully, goose that number for the ACC. But you got to remember, one of the reasons that they did that length of a deal is because it was, they launched the ACC network, and ESPN made a significant, investment in that network and launched it at a time, 2015, 16. So it was 7, 8 years after the Big Ten network. So they launched it in probably not as good of a market, and they want to be insured. ESPN wants to certainly be insured that they're going to have an opportunity to make a return on that investment, which was significant. And so, hence, you're gonna have to sign a much longer term deal in order for them to be ensured that they're going to have a chance to recoup that investment. So I'd hate to see the ACC fall apart. I think it's a great conference and with some great markets and some great institutions. And I hope that them and ESPN can figure out a way to, get everybody to a point where they're comfortable being where they're at.
Do you see a future where there could be like two or three super conferences or something in the Power Five ranks, maybe?
I think you could. I think, what normally happens is the movement is usually around expiration of TV deals. And the last movement was in 2010, 11, when some schools went to the SEC and some schools went to the Big Ten, things like that. And then it kind of settled down until now, which because all the TV deals were up for renewal. And so now, instead of 12-year TV deals, it looks like people are doing, put the ACC aside, you've got 5 and 6 year deals, which I think makes more sense in this era when the TV as we know it is constantly changing and will probably change, as much in the next 6 years as it did in the last 12 years. So I think shorter deals makes a lot of sense. And, so if there's going to be movement, like I say, assuming the Pac-12 can get their deal done, the next round of movement would probably be, closer to 2030 or, thereabouts right before then.
And then the other question that's always fascinated me is, let's just take the hypotheticals around the Pac-12, that Washington and Oregon, would like to get to the Big Ten. How did you and how do others look at individual schools as brands? Is that important as you're looking? I mean, obviously Notre Dame, Texas, Ohio State, some of these mega brands, but how does a Washington or an Oregon, how are they looked at as you're putting together the pieces of a network?
Well, being a TV guy, I'm always going to look at numbers. So I'm going to look at market size. I'm going to look at what their ratings have been, how they performed in their current situation. I was consulted on many potential movement. I never lobbied for a movement to actually happen. I never picked up the phone and called a commissioner and say, it'd be really nice if you went and, stole these guys from Conference Y. But that's not to say that we were not consulted, because certainly one of the reasons that conferences look to expand is to potentially expand their pie of the TV revenue. And so, certainly I would look at rivalries. I would look at, what the kind of the culture is at the school. Does that culture fit with that conference? Because you guys know, you've been around this enough that the Pac-12 is got a different culture than the South or the Big 12, and the Big 10 has a different culture than the SEC. And it's hard to describe it, but you feel it, you know it, you can see it. And one of the things that I've always been careful of as far as it suggesting what a value might be for an expansion, I always ask the question of myself and the conference: are you sure? Is this a good fit? Is it a good fit culturally? Is it a good fit academically? Who's their rival going to be? How's that all going to work out? Because those are the games that resonate on TV. Those are the games that resonate with viewers. And anytime you look at movement, and before I throw out any numbers, I would certainly say to myself and to the conference, is this something that really makes sense? And then you go in and you can run all the numbers and find out real quickly, is it, additive or is it dilutive to the payout on a per school basis?
Bob, I want to ask you one more question before we let you go. Go back again to the beginning of the Big Ten Network as you're making those plans. When you look back now on that and the success that it's had, where BTN is right now, did you exceed expectations, or is there something still that you feel like you left on the table that maybe you wish you would have put into play?
With Big Ten Network, no, I can't. I've got a lot of other regrets in my career, but that one worked out pretty good. I had to thank the heavens for the Michigan Appalachian State game to kick off.
That's
I
good.
mean, you couldn't have ever asked for anything better than that. That was certainly something sent from above. So, but no, the Big Ten, network turned out great. Jim held it together. I'll never forget when he would call me and we'd have these long discussions, probably each had a glass of wine at our end of the phone. And I'll never forget he was in at the Olympics somewhere and for the basketball side of it. And I had talked to him, odd time zones. The Olympics were overseas somewhere. I can't even remember where. And I said, I think we're getting close. And so he gets on a plane, flies home, gets in the sack because he's been on a plane for 14, 16 hours, and we get the deal done. And so, he wakes up and he's got like 10 voice messages. I'm like, would you call me back? This is done. We're going. And, we're that close. And I want to give them the go ahead to put the games on, even though everything wasn't quite finalized, but we were close enough. And we wanted to hit that first Saturday morning with football. So, I'll never forget talking to him the first time, and he was like, "Is this a dream?" I've been on a plane. I wake up, I get on the plane, nothing's done. I wake up, and everything's done, and we're everywhere. And so that was one of the great things. But no regrets with the Big Ten. I think it's really evolved. And, Mark Silverman did a fantastic job taking the network from kind of our idea and what we put together and ran with it. And I always told him, I said, you worry about how the channel looks. We'll worry about getting the carriage deals done, because the last thing we want is people to say it looks crappy and have a reason not to carry it. And so, we launched full HD. There were some hiccups along the way. We had some hits and misses with programming, but any network has that. And so, I look at it now, and it's something that makes me very, very proud. I've got a picture over here on the wall of us pulling the lever, which was basically a stick with a bowling ball on top of it, but it served the purpose. And the one of the happiest moments of my life is when we pulled that, and Dave Redson actually showed up on the screens.
Well, I can tell you, you had a much better launch and a better lifespan than what we had with CNSI. December 12th, 1996 was such a mess that we couldn't even go live. I mean, it was, and I'll leave that for another conversation. So Big Ten flourishing right now, and we are thankful for your genius and everyone involved. Bob Thompson, great to talk with you. Hopefully we get a chance to catch up again soon and get your thoughts. Like we said, we know that this thing is not over. There are probably still several iterations of this expansion process in college sports still to come.
My pleasure, guys. Really enjoyed it. Look forward to catching up with you again.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much. It's Bob Thompson, former president of Fox Sports Networks and also the founder of the Thompson Sports Group. Giving us his very unique perspective on not just college sports, but the media and how that's involved. And of course, the Big Ten Network and what it has become now. Stay with us. We've got to pay some bills, but we'll be right back. We promise.